Well, Derek Webb, welcome to the show. I'm so excited you're on today. This will be so fun to chat with you. I was telling you earlier that I was fanning out because I very rarely approach my wife and say, "You'll never guess who I'm going to have on the podcast." I've been listening to your music for 20 years, so welcome to the show.
Man, thank you for that. Gosh, I'm so glad that this can happen. And, the thing that's going to be a problem is that you're going to say that, and then your audience is going to be like so excited about who this could be, and they're never going to have heard of me. And so that happens a lot. So that's okay.
Hey, well, this will be fun. You're more than just a musician. You are a creative. I've kind of been following you on Instagram and social media and stuff, and we'll get into that. But I want to first start out just with, how did you first get into music? Everybody's got kind of their story on how they first got into their craft. Tell me the story about how you first got into music.
Yeah. Well, so the thing I usually kind of say about this is that I am hardly good at anything. I can just almost do nothing. There's just a couple of things that I am good at, but those few things I'm really good at, and I know what they are, and I've known what they were since I was pretty young. And music is just one of those things. I was like probably 6 or 7 years old, and I found a guitar in a case in my mom's closet or whatever, and pulled it out and tuned it probably to a chord and started playing it. And also grew up playing piano, but probably 6, 7 years old, picked up an instrument, picked up guitar. My mom kind of taught me piano as well. And it's just been the one thing that has made sense to me my whole life. And as I was a young kid and an adolescent, like nothing that was being measured or valued at those times in my life, I was terrible at all the things that were being valued and measured. And like social, sports, school, all that stuff, awful, terrible, super terrible, very frustrated at all that stuff. But music always made sense. And so I've just leaned my weight on that over the years, and just made choices in line with what will keep me busy doing the couple of things I'm good at. And here I am 50 something years old and still doing it. And I've done it my whole life. So, I realize, because I have teenagers now, how unusual it is, and I'm very grateful to have kind of known what I wanted to do and what I could do at a really early age. And so there was never a point where I was trying to figure that out. I mean, as early as I can remember, this was the thing. And I think that, like, when you're young, when you start to see your friends, there's different ages for everybody, but when you start to see your friends find their thing, even if it's just the thing for that season, they find that thing, that one thing, that class they're great at in school, or that sport they can do, or they're easygoing socially, whatever it might be. But you see people kind of starting to group up and find their stuff and their thing. And I before I found music, and I for sure didn't know what I could do and what was I good at. I just didn't seem to be good at much. But I realized that it's kind of remarkable to find your thing really early. And I know what a gift that is, as I've walked with friends and now my kids who are trying to find their thing, and trying to figure themselves out and what they're good at and what they want to do and what they can contribute. So, I've just known for a super long time.
So I always tell my kids I was a pretty big deal. I was on the 7th grade C team basketball team. Sports was definitely, I had fun with it, but definitely not my thing either. It's fun to hear. I think it's good for kids to know that they don't have to, there's not one set path, right? And
Yes.
what was it like for you, kind of knowing what you want to do in life, which is be creative or be a musician, and then stumbling upon or getting involved with Caedmon's Call, which, for folks that don't know, go Google it, Wikipedia. It was, arguably one of the bigger faith-based bands out there in the late 90s, early 2000s, toured with, the biggest names in that genre. But tell me about what it was like, knowing that, going from knowing that you love music to then becoming a part of a quote unquote successful band.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed very random at the time, but as I look back, I spent my early life, I got my 10,000 hours in, by the time I was 10 years old. I mean, I really, because once I found this thing, and there was something that seemed to come easy to me. And just to interject, a thing I say to friends and I think about a lot, actually, I really actively think about is like the language of like vocation or calling or whatever you want to word that. It tends to be, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could think about it, but for me, a helpful way is it's like the intersection of three really important things, and you really need all three, and that is interest and talent and opportunity. And sometimes you naturally have two out of three. You really have to have all three. You don't they don't all have to come naturally. Sometimes you have to work for the third. You know, you can have talent and opportunity but no interest. You can have interest and talent but no opportunity, but you have to have all three for it to really work. And I had a lot of interest and I did have some talent, but I had no opportunity for a very long time. And so as a young kid, I failed out of school basically every grade forever because I would spend 10 hours a day practicing the guitar and eventually starting to write songs and study songwriters and then eventually kind of singing. That was more of a thing I had to do and got good at over the years, but hadn't planned on early. But anyways, I kind of did all this practicing. And then once I hit, but I was so early to it that there were no other kids who were into music and playing instruments that were taking it seriously. I remember going to a kid's house because I was trying to start a band, but probably would have been in like the third grade. And I really wanted to be in a band. I cannot tell you how bad. And this kid was like, yeah, let's start a band. I was like, great. I was like, do you play anything? He's, yeah, I play drums. I was like, oh, great. I play guitar. I'm going to bring my stuff over. And I brought like my amp, my guitar, and my pedals. I mean, I was, even in third grade, I was ready to go. And this kid like brings the pots and pans from the kitchen out. And I was like, dude, like, come on, like it's my whole day wasted. I don't know what I had to do in the third grade that I was so upset about that. But the point is like, I finally got to like junior high. And that's when, that's not the question you're asking. So I won't pause there, but like, that's when I found my way into bands and I found other musicians and that was my life. Like from junior high till I graduated high school, I was in bands and I was really in a couple of bands and spent, really committed and worked hard and battled the bands and, travel around our city and managed to get into the studio a little bit, which was very unheard of in the 90s, or in the late 80s, I should really say. To get into a recording studio was pretty rare. It was
It's like winning the lottery back then, right?
Yeah, like you don't know where they were. Like it was cost prohibitive. Nobody owned the gear. And so you'd have to know somebody who had a place who could get you in. And it was, but did manage to do that. And we, the bands I was in were kind of, we were in Texas. And so like, there's a lot of opportunity to drive around and play shows. And, the band I was in high school, we were kind of starting to play even some college gigs. And so the point is I had all this practice and I was playing in bands. And then coming out of high school, I had plans that kind of fell apart. You don't want to know the story right now, but like I was in this band who did really well in high school, but then kind of broke up right before the end of high school for reasons and that none of us really could control. So I kind of got out of high school and didn't have a plan and felt pretty hopeless for a minute. Like, oh, like this is all I've ever done. And now what am I supposed to do? I don't really want to go to college. And I did for a hot second, but I didn't really want to because I hated school. But then I got a call from this friend from high school who I didn't even know played music. And it turned out he was a songwriter and I didn't know that. And he'd met this other guy. And as the mythology of it kind of goes, this band was starting and they needed, like it was the inception of it right then. And I met this guy, Cliff Young, and he'd met my buddy, Aaron Tate, who I went to high school with, who was writing songs. Aaron was a songwriter, but did not really, and a musician, but didn't want to be in a band and just didn't want to be on stage and was really introverted. And Cliff was an opportunist and a visionary and really super smart and met Aaron, heard the songs and was like, man, like, let's start a band. Your songs are so good. Like, people would love to hear these. And Aaron was like, I don't want to start a band. And Cliff basically had this vision in that moment to say like, well, could I start a band and play your songs? You don't have to be in it, which I cannot imagine how you come up with that question in the moment. And Aaron amazingly was like, yeah, sure. And Cliff was like, all right, cool. Do you know any musicians you can introduce me to? Like, and Aaron, and I was the first person Aaron mentioned to him. And he was like, yeah, call, this friend of mine from high school, great guitar player, was in bands and he'd probably be able to help you out. And I think he's into kind of acoustic folk rock music and he might be into it. So he connected us and then it just, there it was. And and we pulled some more people in and it gets very Malcolm Gladwellian really fast if I really get into the details of the story, which I won't do right now, but like for the sake of time, but it's like we were in Texas. It was the early 90s, it was pre-internet. but we were in Texas and we had all just kind of come out of high school and all of our friends were going to Texas colleges. Really, they were going to colleges all over the country, but like right there in Texas, there was so much opportunity. This guy Cliff I mentioned before, who kind of founded the band, who I met first, his dad was a pastor of a giant megachurch in Houston, and that had a recording studio in it. That was unheard of. And every like weekend, there were like 8,000 people in a room, like 3 times a weekend in this church. So we had opportunity. We could record our music. We had great songs thanks to Aaron. I was not really writing songs in that first year. And then we had people we can play them to because Cliff's dad would let us get up in front of the whole crowd and play our songs and special music or whatever. And then all of a sudden, if we had some little tapes and CDs we'd press and put them on tables outside the exits, we could sell like 10,000 copies in a weekend. So it's like before the internet, before all these resources that have made it so much easier and democratized it, we had such tremendous stuff going for us down there in Houston. And so that just really propelled us. And at the end of the day, we were making what we were looking for, what we needed and could not find, which was soundtrack to being a college age kind of pseudo young intellectual having a faith experience. There was no music. There was no soundtrack for that we could find that was kind of telling our stories. And so that's kind of what we set out to do. And my entire creative life, all the way up to literally the day that I'm talking to you right now in February of 2026, that has been my MO. Like, look for like what you need and can't find, you make. That like you solve your own problem. And that's where all the good kind of stuff and creativity really comes from. And that's what we were doing then. That's what I have done through my career. But yeah, it's like I felt like I'd trained my whole life to finally find and be in that band. And I got so lucky with such a great group of people, great songs. And as I said, it was that time. It was that time in history. It was just pre-internet. And then halfway through our band's first 10 years that were kind of our big first 10 years that we had together, the internet turned on, Al Gore showed up and turned on the internet.
Al Gore
And,
invented.
and then exactly. That's right. He turned it on. And then all of a sudden that really doused the whole thing with gasoline. And yeah, so it was, and then you spend, 10 years suddenly doing your favorite thing with like your best friends in a bus. And yeah, it was such a great experience. I have such fond memories, and everything I have now, I was propelled out of that experience. I mean, that gave me everything. The band that I was in and those early years in Texas gave me everything.
That's awesome. So what was it that took you from being in this, I would say successful band? There's very few people, in the US that get to experience, Billboard chart music and touring around. And it's had to have been a really amazing experience just listening to you tell some of the story. It sounds like it was mostly positive. But what made you want to decide to then just go solo, right? Because you probably just could have stayed in Caedmon's Call or a different band and just kept doing that thing, but something in you maybe wanted to experience something new or different. Tell me about that process of kind of wanting to go solo or going solo.
Yeah, well, I did not ever imagine it. I loved being in a band. And like you said, I mean, all my experience was being in bands. I never imagined or had any ambition or vision for being like a solo artist or whatever. I didn't really know how I would do that. When I first joined Caedmon's, I was just a guitar player, and I was a confident musician. I've been playing my whole life, and so I could kind of come in and help band lead and help put it together. And I knew how to sing harmonies, and I could hold my pitch, whatever. So it's like I didn't even have all the tools at my disposal even yet, and so all that got developed being in the band, and I started writing, and then Aaron and I kind of tag teamed the writing. He was writing his songs, I was writing mine, and I wound up writing half the band's material over that first 10 years, and from that wound up being a singer, and so it all kind of came together in the band there. But all of my training, so to speak, had been being in bands and I worshipped bands, like all growing up. That's really what I wanted to do. And then, after 10 years, and those were such good years, and we did well, like we succeeded at it, and we had good success at it and all that. But then what happens is like so much of this just comes out of your life rhythms and what's changing about your life, and you just kind of needing new things. And so after 10 years in that band, and that's longer than most bands get. I mean, we had a really good run for those first 10 years. I'll cut to the Chase, for people who don't know our band and our history, that, the band Caedmon's Call, as it turns out, is very much like Hotel California. You can check out whenever you like, but you never really get to leave. And I'm somehow still in this band, if you can imagine that, because just a couple years ago we played like two sold out shows of the Ryman here in Nashville. So it's like we still do stuff together sometimes, but that first 10 years before I left to start my solo career was kind of its own, really important decade for us and for me. But at the end of that 10 years, my life was changing. I'd moved to Nashville. I had met somebody. I was in a relationship. My priorities started changing. My personal life was just getting a little busier. I was, in my mid 20s or late 20s by that time. And I was like 19 when we started the band. Our band had a lot of success and some failure, and some success again and some failure again. And so it's like we were putting a lot of internal pressures on ourselves. And in that amount of time, a lot of your friends' lives get wrapped up and people's livings get wrapped up in the success that you have. So you get more risk averse. And so you start to change the things that started your band and the spark that got you going, of taking risks and saying things that are important and having a platform to stand on and be disruptive, and all the things you do when you're young. You can't do those things the same way when your platform gets tall, because you get into the platform maintenance and building business, and you don't want to take those risks as much anymore. So it's like the dynamics all shifted. So it was right around that 10-year mark that I was writing songs. I was just looking at the world and describing it, which has always been the way I've described my job as a writer, as a songwriter, is you look at the world, you tell us what you see. And as I was doing that, 10 years in in a lot of it being kind of in what's called the Christian music business, because that's the way we were marketed a lot, although we were really just a college band. I had, you see a lot. You see a lot of about how the sausage is made, and you see a lot about the business, and you see a lot of what goes on in these churches, and it's disheartening, and you wind up really seeing what's going on behind the scenes. And I started naturally, as a result, writing songs about what I was seeing that was frustrating to me, and the way I was seeing the church kind of not behaving well in the world and in culture. And it started to bother me. And so I started to write about that. And those songs around that 10-year mark it was not a great match. The riskier material that I was naturally starting to write, and the band needing to protect what we had built over those first 10 years, which made perfect sense to me, just were not as compatible at that point. And the band understood. Like, I was showing the band the new songs that I was writing, and they thought they were good songs, and they wanted me to play them, but they were like, just not on a Caedmon's Call stage, because that is going to be super risky and it's going to like blow up our whole deal. And so the only way for me to do that was to do it on my own time, of which I had none, because the band was so demanding, the schedule was so demanding. So I wound up in this decision point, and the counsel I got from friends and what felt right in my gut was to follow the energy of the songs, to follow the songs where they were going, because I did trust that. And so I followed them right out into a solo career, which is just the only place I could go sing this riskier material. It was to lower the platform, to get closer down to the ground where the risk was easier to take down there. Because now it's just my reputation and not 10 years of legacy we've built in this band and whatever else. So that's kind of what launched me into it. And it was good, because I started my solo career by taking risks in terms of the subject matter and the material. And because that was the early expectation, there was never a point where I shifted into that. That's always what I did as a solo artist. And that's how I'm kind of wired. I'm contrary. So that's been kind of one of the hallmarks of my music career as a solo artist.
How's that been? Because if somebody goes and takes a peek at some of your stuff, you don't necessarily agree with a lot of the maybe current behaviors of big churches in America. That's a blanket statement, but you're a little bit rebellious in that regard,
Sure.
which I think is fascinating. And so tell me a little bit about how that's been received. Do your fans get pissed off? Do churches be like, I don't want you playing at my church? Or have you had to find a whole different fan base? It obviously is something you're very convicted to do, or you would have just stayed in the band. This is probably
Yes.
that's a little harder
Right.
and pays a little less. So you really got to,
Yeah.
have that conviction. So talk to me a little bit about how that's been. I'm sure it's been tough at times.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it was interesting because I came out of our band with the wind at my back because we had these great fans and 10 long years with these folks. And I'd been writing a lot of those songs. And so there was this great connection that I had with that group of people. More so with, a segment of that group of people. They felt connected to the songs I had been writing. And so it felt natural for them to come with and kind of support me in my early solo career. And that's not a thing a lot that most debut artists get. You don't get that support right out of the gate like that. So it kind of emboldened me and gave me some confidence to go in and take those risks early. And so as I mentioned before, that was one of the good features of my early career is they felt like it felt for me like they were pretty on board for that. Now, here's what happens is over time, you eventually get around to pissing everybody off though, because like everybody's there for kind of different reasons, you know? And so miraculously, there are some people. Here I am in my 30 something year of doing this job. I started when I was, in 1992, we started Caedmon's and it's 2026 now. So it's like I'm 30 something years into this job. And there are, if you can believe it, some people who have literally been with me since those first couple of years. We have just gone through apparently some of the same changes and we have the same questions about what we see when we look at the world. And so that works. That said, another thing I'm so grateful for is that the years I spent, that first 10 years especially I spent in Caedmon's, we had success to an extent that I got a taste of that. And I got a sense of what that feels like and what it looks like. But I also got a sense of what's required to sustain that and the compromises you eventually have to make in order to keep that going and to continue growing it up on a high level, high platform like that. And so because I had the luxury of already having felt that success and already playing for thousands of people a night. And so I kind of didn't need that anymore from it. My ego didn't need that anymore. So I was in a much better spot to take some of the risks that I would have eventually take over time, really gnawing on the hand that fed me for most of my career coming out of kind of that church world. And then eventually, and always having that, haunting me and following back behind me is people who maybe associate me with spirituality and maybe even Christianity and some of that stuff where our band got some of our early associations. It's like the scarlet letter that you can never really get rid of in the marketplace. And so for that reason, people have bristled for sure as I have pressed about issues that I think are important. And I've looked at the world and continued to describe it. The world, which is always changing, myself, which is always changing. And I just got really comfortable and happy with being a blue collar artist. And so I don't need to be wealthy or famous doing this. And that's a good thing because there are 20 things ahead of being a professional indie musician that I would guide you into if you told me you want to be rich and famous. Going into music is one of the last things you should do. Unless you want to get on The Voice and have the rocket stardom and then be over in 6 months. Like if you really want to do this job, if you want to show up and do this job for your work, you can do it. There are opportunities, but your ego has to bear not being a household name and not making 7 figures a year because it's just not going to happen. It's just so improbable. And so I had to learn to get creative and do a half a dozen things that were all an expression of my interest in music and the music space and expressing myself or whatever, being creative, and learn how to lean my weight around 4, 5, 6 things at any given time and always looking on the horizon to continue solving my own problems creatively to find it's really just I'm describing an entrepreneurial view of the world and work. And so I continue to look for that. And so in my career, my blue collar indie music career, I was always looking for solutions I might come up with that I could scale that could be solutions for other people. And could I turn that into a little business or a little side hustle? And I've done that so many times over the years, and that all winds up being part of what makes it a living. And so I've learned to spread the burden of my income around and off of my music career enough to where I can really stay honest and vulnerable in it and retain the trust of the audience that does resonate with the questions I ask. And then honestly, my rhythm is every album cycle, I expect to lose about a third of my people. About a third of the people over the years I've done this are going to tend to drop off as a result of whatever it is that I am into right now and whatever it is I feel is important for me to say and challenge right now. About a third of people are gonna leave. And then there'll be, maybe hopefully, my goal is to put that third back of new people who are coming in for the same reason the other people are headed out. And so I don't mind that churn. I think that's healthy for an artist. I don't need more fans. I'm not looking to grow my fan base. I just need to hang on to my little plot of land and churn people through it and continue to be honest and be okay with letting go of some people, and coach and kind of counseling them on social media to letting go of me and telling them it's fine. You don't need to keep telling me that you're leaving. It's fine with me if you need to go. You don't need to keep talking about it. It's not an airport. You don't need to announce your departure. You can just go if you need to. But and kind of counseling them through. I know we've been together for a long time. I understand that I was a part of your college experience, and I love you and thank you for that, but it's okay for you to go. You don't have to spend the rest of your life hating me publicly constantly. And I have these new people now, but like, you get used to that, and I am used to it. So that's been part of how I've sustained it.
Yeah, the I Kiss Dating Goodbye guy probably sees that as well.
Josh Harris, he's a good pal of mine, actually.
Yeah, it was, gosh, year 2000. I went to a Southern Baptist youth retreat in Oregon, and he was the speaker. That's where I came to know Jesus. And it's fun to see his journey, to where
It's
he is
cool.
today. And but I'm sure he gets that a lot. Like, it's probably insane. You both probably get
He
that a lot.
does.
It's just one of those
Yeah,
things.
but it's kind of nice. Yeah. Yeah, well, I was going to say it's kind of nice though, because what's really fascinating about it is that if you do this over time, you do a job like this as long as I have, or Josh has, for instance, the people who you wind up with, where if you just imagine you're a plinko ball and you're hitting every one of those pegs on the way down, the likelihood that you're going to hit the same peg as somebody else all the way down and wind up in the same little random niche and slot at the bottom, it's improbable. And so when it does happen and you do wind up going through some life experiences and you go through some changes of philosophy and spiritual shifts and you go through all this, the people you wind up with at the bottom who've been with you from the beginning, yeah, there's a lot of people you lose, and over years, I mean, I shed a lot of these people, but as I mentioned, some of them are still there, and the relationship that we have to each other is so special now. And it's like we've been together for so long, and it just means a lot. It's like, that is these are my real friends. Like, I could name some of these people for you by name. Like, they're now in my Patreon, they're my patrons now, but it's like, I literally still talk to these people and they're my real friends. I mean, and that is such a tremendous cool thing to get out of your work over all this time. And it's worth going through it publicly to, first of all, demonstrate that you can change, you should learn, you should be healthy and change and evolve, and you can do that, and you can do it safely, and you can still be yourself. And then to be able to provide soundtrack to people who are doing that in their lives is a thing I really take seriously, and I love that work, doing that for people. So
That's awesome. I think one of the things that I recently saw on your social media, which hopefully it's still available for folks to check out, is you're kind of giving a peek behind the curtains of your songwriting process. Is that fair to say?
yeah, 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 yeah,
So tell folks how
yeah.
they can get involved in that.
Yeah. So, well, and I'll there's a few things, like, because I do talk. I like to encourage fellow, like, indie artists, and I like to. So I do talk a decent amount about my process, and I talk about how I manage this blue collar living that I kind of try to make in this space, but specifically around songwriting. If we're thinking about the same thing, it's a thing I've done for a long time, for 30 years, and I didn't realize I was qualified to say anything about until really just the last handful of years, because I just thought, it's like, you can't teach songwriting because it's a thing that you can't coach anybody through that, because it's such a personal thing and it's different for everybody. And it's like, and I don't even know how I do it. That's what I thought. And then I started thinking about it, and I had some guitar students. It's one of my side hustles. I teach online, and who wanted to transition into some songwriting, and they wanted to ask me questions. The more that we talked about it, I was like, I really do have a lot to say about songwriting. Like, I really have learned some things I do think are very applicable and maybe could work for anybody, now that I really think about the way I have decoded the way I do it. It really does. And so I kind of backed my way into coaching songwriting students. And I'm actually writing a book on songwriting right now called You're Already a Songwriter, because I do really believe it's something everybody can do. And I think that the things that causes songs to get written are things that everyone's doing in their bodies, whether they realize it or not. It's just a matter of seeing it, noticing it, documenting it. And so anyways, it's like, and that's been this really amazing, fun part of the more recent season I've been the last handful of years, is working with songwriters and externalizing my process in a way that I can teach it to somebody and they can use it and they can try it out. So it's like, yeah, I hope you hear me as I'm describing this. This has been for me yet another way of applying my entrepreneurial instincts to what am I qualified in the world to do? What in the world am I qualified to do at this point? And it's like, there was a point where I realized, like, well, I've played music and I've toured and written music for 30 something years. God knows I've got to be some level of, I've at least have to be an expert in failing at it at this point. Cause I mean, and somehow fighting through the failure to grab success somewhere in it, and all the things you learn, all the great things you learn from failure. So it's like, it dawned on me, like, maybe that's a thing I could help with. Maybe that's a thing I could contribute. And maybe that's a thing I could make one of my, 4 to 5 to 6 spokes of creative work that make up a living for an adult creative person. Maybe that could be one. And it has been. It's been one of the most rewarding things I've been doing in the last couple of years, has been coaching young songwriters and songwriting students. And yeah, it's been great. I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. I want to be mindful of your time. For folks listening in, I'm going to put all the links to Derek's music and website and all those social media stuff into the podcast description. I want to encourage folks to go check out his music, go buy some music. He's a phenomenal storyteller and inspiration, and a advocate for the things that he believes in. And I think it's a really great picture for somebody to see that you can still do your thing and be yourself and appreciate where you came from. And listening to your story, you have nothing but positive things to say, which I really think is phenomenal. And do you have any last minute thoughts here before we head off, Derek?
Well, man, I'm so grateful I'm so glad we found each other and we connected and that we were able to have this convo. I do hope people will check out the music and all that. And as I've said, and I think I said recently on social media, even, like, I am not for everybody. My music is not for everybody. So it's okay if you check it out and you don't especially love it, or it's not maybe where you're at. I appreciate you listening anyway. For the people who it is for, it might be very for, because I'm such a niche writer, and all the experiences I've had are, it makes me qualified to write soundtrack for a very narrow group of people. And so if that is you, I'd be grateful to find you. And just to reiterate what you were just saying, because I do think it's important that yes, you can hold in your physical body all the complexity that you bring, that it's part of your story that you bring to bear on your work and your personal life. There will be people who tell you cannot be all those things at one time. That's way too much. It's way too complex. You cannot be all those things. I would like to be contrary argument to that you really can. Because if I can do the work I'm doing and find folks to support me in doing it, and have done it for this long, and bring all these weird seasons of life and perspectives to it, I promise you that you can. And it will be the most valuable work that you can do, because the more particular and peculiar you can be in the work you're doing, the more you can really express yourself and all the nuances of your personality and life experience, the more you can do that and not hide it as being mass appealing and camouflage it as being mass appealing because you think that's what you're supposed to do. The more you can let it be as weird and quirky as it is, the only way that the people who need it are going to be able to find it. The people who are just as weird as you in the same ways are going to be able to find it. And so that is a universal encouragement that I would like to say with you to folks who might be listening, like, find your thing and be weird. And there are people who need you, and there are people who need that perspective. And there are people who only you can, if you're a songwriter, there are people only you can write soundtrack for. But you have to trust holding all that complexity in your body to do that. And that's what I've tried to do. So anyways, yes, I love that. Love that statement. So grateful to get to be here. I hope we can talk again.
Well, Derek, it's been a blast. I've listened to your music for, 25 years now, and keep doing what you're doing. You're a true inspiration. Folks, go check out all the links in the podcast description. And Derek, you're welcome back anytime.